There's a fair amount of people in here. Welcome everybody to Frank Analysis. I'm your host Franco. I'm joined by three of my friends here. We have Charles Anderson of the Lone Wolf Podcast. How are you doing, sir?
Doing very well, Franco. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm also joined by Fuzz the Fair, returning to the show. How are you doing, bro?
Doing all right. Howdy, everybody.
And we also have Marcus Cage, who is driving back home, and you will see him on the screen soon. How are you doing, Marcus?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me again. And fellow panelists, good to be here with you.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot that happened last week. The topics have carried over onto this week. There's also a lot that happened this week, but we'll start off by talking about what's his name? Rand Paul interrogating Antony Blinken for his warmongering. Bernie Sanders didn't do it, despite Bernie Sanders supposedly being the most anti-war candidate according to Rose Twitter. But no, we have Rand Paul. So I have a video clip to show everybody, and then I'll get the thoughts from my panel, and then we'll also look at what the viewers think about it.
Like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, you've been a consistent supporter of military intervention in the Middle East, from the Iraq War, to the Libyan War, to the Syrian Civil War. Some on your side of the aisle, including the president-elect, have said, well, we were given bad intelligence. They misled us on the intelligence on Iraq. That's a very specific reason. There's probably some truth to it, but I think it misses sort of the lesson of the Iraq War. Likewise, your justification for maybe coming to a new approach on the Libyan Civil War is, well, maybe we overestimated the idea of having viable successors there. To me, it seems like we're still missing the point, because even after Libya, you guys went on to Syria wanting to do the same thing again, and you've argued, well, maybe we just didn't do enough. If we'd done more, we could have toppled Assad and we could have had real regime change in Syria. Well, you got it in Iraq, you got it in Libya, and it's a disaster. The lesson of these wars is that regime change doesn't work. Mostly what you've gotten through the policies you have advocated, and Joe Biden has advocated, and frankly, John Bolton has advocated, this idea of regime change has been a disaster for the Middle East. We complain, everybody around here is concerned, Iran. Well, why is Iran stronger? Who's their best friend in the region now? Iraq. We did that. We had a balance of power. It wasn't perfect, but we had somewhat of a balance of power in the Middle East, and you guys messed it up. You got rid of the one bad guy, and another bad guy got stronger. And so then you went to Libya and did the same thing. And they said, well, maybe Libya's a one-off. Well, maybe there's a rule here. Maybe there's something we can learn about regime change, and maybe we can learn that humility would be that maybe we shouldn't be choosing every government in the Middle East. I would argue that instead of always choosing the governments, maybe we should not reward the bad ones. You know what I mean? So, for example, with Saudi Arabia, I despise the regime. I'd probably still trade with them. I probably wouldn't cut them off completely. I wouldn't sell them any more arms. And after they killed Khashoggi, they shouldn't have got one bit of our armaments. But both sides advocate for this. On UAE, we tried to stop that because UAE has a terrible human rights record. Both sides support it. The problem around here is we have bipartisan consensus. The problem isn't lack of consensus. The problem is too much consensus. But the consensus is for regime change. Are any of the lessons you've learned from the failure of Iraq war, Libyan war, the chaos, the vacuum, and more terrorism that occurred and more lives that were lost, and then to go on to Syria? I don't get that there's been a lesson learned.
Senator, I think we and I certainly have an absolute obligation to try to learn from everything we've done, advocated, to take into account the results, and to make that inform how we think about these problems going forward. And I've done a lot of hard thinking about some of the very situations you mentioned. I'm proud of the fact that I have spent all of my career during the times I've been in government, for the better part of 25 years, working to advance our diplomacy, to do everything we possibly can to make sure that diplomacy is the first answer, not the last answer, and that war and conflict is a last resort.
The next step was Syria. The next step was the Syrian Civil War, which looks a lot like the Iraq War and the Libyan War.
In Syria, there were those who were advocating for a repeat of Iraq, which is to say a whole-scale intervention. That's something that I did not agree with. When we were looking at what to do in Afghanistan.
Here's the problem in Syria. There was a predictable result there. Had you gotten rid of Assad, who are the fiercest fighters over there? Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. The more radical you were, the better fighters you were. The program that you started with Hillary Clinton, the program to train the moderate rebels, we spent $250 million. We trained about 60. We sent 10 of them into battle, and they were captured in the first 10 minutes. It was a complete disaster. This whole idea that there were moderates over there that we were going to support, doctors and lawyers and stuff, there were, but I don't think they were out there fighting. The ones out there fighting were jihadists, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and if they'd have taken over the country, Assad's a terrible person. But I'm not positive that these people would have been better. I don't think you have completely gotten the idea that regime change has been a terrible disaster. It's created vacuums, chaos, and actually more terrorism throughout the region. So I hope you will consider that. It's important, not just for the philosophic point, but it's important for our kids. I mean, we're sending these kids over to fight in these wars that go on forever and ever and ever, and somebody's got to stand up. And I hope you will be somebody brave enough to stand up and stop sometimes.
All right, so that was Rand Paul. And panel, were you guys able to hear that?
Yeah, I got it.
So pretty much he was saying like these wars have been going on and on and on, and the problem isn't that there's like not that there's not enough bipartisanship. The problem is that there's too much bipartisanship. There's both parties agree on going to these wars that just never end. We've been in Afghanistan for what, more than 20 years now? Iraq is about to be 20 years. When are we going to get out of these wars? And that's what Rand Paul was saying. And it's really disappointing to see people like Bernie Sanders, who we were considering to be the most progressive candidate, to vote for somebody like Antony Blinken. And not just that, but Avril Haines and Lloyd Austin. Lloyd Austin takes money from Raytheon. Avril Haines, who has a history of supporting people like Gina Haspel, who supported torture, and also Avril Haines was an architect for the drone program for the Obama administration. So what are your thoughts on this? I guess we can start with you, Charles. I'm interested to hear in all of your historical perspectives. I think all of you guys know more about history than I do, so I'm really interested to hear about what you guys think.
Honestly, there's no logic behind it. Bernie's supposed to be, the progressive candidate here. Even though people say he's a little more hawkish, I definitely think he's a lot more hawkish than, say, someone like Tulsi Gabbard. But at the same time, I've heard him talk about endless war. I've heard him mention these things, and yet he goes out and votes for these kind of candidates to fill the Biden administration. What it really comes down to is, quite simply, Bernie Sanders needs to remove the I after his name. He is not an independent. He insults me because I'm an independent. Okay, he is a Democrat through and through. Okay, the reason he's keeping that I after his last name is just for looks, I guess. He is a Democrat. He's doing this because it's the Democrat playbook to have a united front, work together to do whatever the people in charge want done. That's what they've been doing for a long time in the Democrat Party. But one thing in particular really stood out to me, and that is when Rand Paul mentioned the UAE, for example. Now, let's rewind back. You mentioned history. We don't have to really go that far back into history. We'll just take a little trip back to 2016. When right in the middle of all the Russiagate scandal, it came out that during the 2016 election cycle, UAE were making very heavy contributions into someone's campaign. Of course, they're funneling the money through the proper channels, but there were some people who were charged for crimes connected to the UAE. They were funneling money into the Clinton campaign. As soon as Clinton lost and Trump got elected, they immediately switched gears and started funding for Trump's inauguration. They started giving money to the RNC. So right there, you see where the reason we're not butting heads with people like Saudi Arabia or the UAE is just simply because they're buying us off. So when we hear this whole Russiagate thing, to me, that was nothing but smoke and mirrors. We've got election interference coming from foreign countries. We've got good evidence of it right there, but we won't act upon anything. And the main reason they want to keep going into these other Middle Eastern countries, whether it be Iraq, Syria, Libya, well, simple as this. Iraq, we wanted the oil. Libya, they were threatening to go off the petrodollar. Okay? Syria, again, just another strategic move. And these people have been part of this war hawk status quo playbook for so long. Nothing's going to change. I think the answer he gave was one of the biggest deflections I've heard this week, It was an answer without giving an answer, in my opinion. So you can look forward to about 4 more years of Warhawk Joe Biden at this point, and Bernie Sanders is just going to bend the knee for him when it really comes down to it.
Or 3 years of Warhawk Joe Biden, and then a year of Kamala Harris, Warhawk Kamala Harris, and then some more years of that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Marcus?
Well, it's so much that I can add on to what he said. I mean, it's just, I could go so many different ways with this also, because, I mean, whether we look at currently the stuff which our government has been doing, whether it's been the right or the left, whether Bernie gets out there and does all his shouting and hollering, but occasionally he'll come and he will vote for a defense bill. He's going to still fund this stuff. And the thing is, the reason why the left has such a problem recognizing what a true left candidate is because we've never had one. And the reason why is because when you grow up in the United States, you're given a perspective. And that perspective that you have leads those actions. So even your mildest reaction, most of the time, is still out of line with the real reality of the situation, because most Americans don't understand that we're still basically operating on the Monroe Doctrine. We go into other countries for X, Y, and Z. We tell these countries how they're going to think. We tell these countries how they're going to do business. We tell them what they can and cannot do, while we go in and hypocritically go in and literally do all the same stuff we're telling countries not to do. I mean, Bernie is not a Democrat. The only reason why he keeps that eye is to confuse those or be kind of a sheep herder. That's all that eye is about, because even when he doesn't vote for, say a major war, it doesn't really matter, because he's that one vote. You got to have at least one vote out there who's giving the people who are against it a voice. And what happens is we will get wrapped up in that voice and listen to that person and kind of forget and not pay attention to all these other things that they're doing around them. For me, Tulsi Gabbard was brought up. Tulsi Gabbard is less hawkish, true, but she's still hawkish. Every American politician we have is hawkish, because our mentality as Americans is that we are dominant and we're going to tell everybody else how it's going to go. So, I mean, I hope that gives you my thoughts and it fits in, and explains some things. But we have to change our mindset as Americans, as individuals, as a whole. And we have to have almost like an extreme zero tolerance to any politician who is even fine with these things or won't speak up viciously against them. That's just my take.
Yeah, so let's bring Fuzz into the conversation. What's your take?
So people shouldn't really be surprised with Bernie's history of siding with both the intelligence agency and a member of the class that he continues to root for, as Charles pointed out. And Marcus, the material evidence of what you mentioned as Bernie as a sheep herder is an article called, if I remember correctly, Bernie the Bomber's Bad Week.
Yep.
Where he has a backroom deal with Democrats in order to keep his seat independent, he must never support a third party and only sheep herd new voters into the Democratic Party. So that's one. And because of this deception, he has a tendency to lie about being anti-war, because he sided with the CIA on the, I believe it was 99 bombing of Yugoslavia. And in addition to that, he deceives people in passing off the social democracy of the Nordic model when it is fueled by NATO budget imperialism. And just replace the name of the Raytheon company of the US with the Swedish and Scandinavian Saab and Bofors defense industry that's there, that has an involvement in receiving, I believe it's 11 billion kroner in between 2017 to 2019 to have an arms deal to perpetuate the Yemen civil war. So this shouldn't really be too much surprising for anybody that's done their homework on Bernie.
Yeah, and also how he voted to increase or something about like recognizing Gaddafi as somebody dangerous, which then led to, which was an open invitation for the U.S. and its Western allies to overthrow Gaddafi. So yeah, I mean, and also how he was supportive of the Afghanistan war. He does have a history of that. But
in addition to that, I also wanted to throw in that the reason he is unable to highlight actually existing socialist countries, which despite their flaws would be the actual closer definition to what he's trying to sell to the American people. But it's impossible for him to get into that because he would have to out the plans to keep the blockade in motion and the sanctions as well.
Yeah. So let's bring Charles back into this. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, yeah, I think Marcus made some pretty good points. The only thing I would say, as far as to what he pointed out about why Bernie's keeping his eye after his name to be that one vote, I mean, realistically, I think we could kind of turn to someone like Rand Paul on the Republican side, too, which ironically enough is kind of what this whole topic pertains to right now. Rand Paul grilling this guy when Bernie wouldn't. Rand Paul is a lot of a libertarian, but, you know, rather than run as a libertarian, be that one vote, he ran as a Republican. Bernie Sanders is definitely sheepdogging for the Democrats. So even if we're going to say that he's not a Democrat, he's without a doubt in my book playing ball for them entirely. And so that's why I say he might as well be a Democrat. When the rubber meets the road, one thing I've learned about Bernie Sanders is he talks a great game. But when it's time to put up or shut up, he always folds. He did it in 2016 when he found out that they rigged the primary against him, and he hasn't really said much about that. You know, he talks about, you know, all these things that he wants to do for our country, yet he wouldn't say anything about Julian Assange. I don't know that he's ever said anything good about what Snowden did. Okay. Just in this primary right here, he thought it was great that we got the superdelegates moved to a second round of voting at the convention instead of just eliminating that crappy superdelegate system all the way around. And in the meantime, when he's got mainstream media working against him, telling all their viewers, you need someone who can beat Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders can't do it, but Joe Biden can. And then he gets an opportunity to pitch for himself. And they toss the question, can Joe Biden beat Donald Trump? And you say yes. I mean, he did himself in. So without a doubt, you know, Bernie Sanders, we can debate who's more of a hawk. But at the end of the day, he's not only got a reputation of being kind of hawkish, he's just a sellout.
It also doesn't live up to what the hopes that I had and many other people who supported him in 2016 and 2020 had, which is like, oh, he learned from his mistakes from the past. Yes, he made some mistakes when it comes to foreign policy, but now he's trying to fix those mistakes. He's not trying to be as imperialistic as he used to be, that he's better now. And he's also not using the popularity that he has. You know, he can ruin those politicians' lives by using the support base that he has. He has millions of people who support him and who will have his back. But I guess he doesn't see that. I guess he's too much in the circle of DC, that he cares too much about his reputation in his inner circle, and he's not seeing all these people that have his back. I don't know if you agree with that, Marcus. What do you think?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, I guess I'll kind of clarify something I said before. I do think he's a sheep herder, but does he even know he's a sheep herder? I don't know. I don't know if he is doing this intentionally or if he just doesn't have the spine in him when it comes down to it. Whether they have something on him, in his past, or whether he just doesn't have the confidence to think that he can really get the movement. Well, I know he has the confidence because he said if he became president, he would use them. He would literally go to certain politicians' districts and kick up a shitstorm. And so if he knows that he could have did that as president, to all of a sudden sit there comfy with your hands folded in those nice little mitts, it doesn't look good for me. That just looks suspect. And when it comes down to it, I come from more of an activist background and just a person who's like, this is what this says, this is what that says, this is what you either stand for or you don't. And so I'm not with somebody who gets in and decides to try to play the Washington games. Now, he may think that he's clever enough to, I'm going to submit on this, but I'm really going to sneak these other things in. And he could be that delusional. But either way, any of these options, it doesn't look good for Bernie. And Charles brought up a great point about Rand Paul. He's the same thing. He's really a libertarian, but he's playing that role for those Republicans who got a little bit of a wild streak to him. I mean, that's the only thing he's doing. He's like the Republican who's cool with smoking pot and then just want the government out of their business. And, that's it. But he's not going to literally take that move into the libertarian lane and try to push for all of those objectives and principles. And that's what his purpose is, I believe, in the grand scheme of things, because they need controlled opposition, and so to kind of keep us in check, you got to put somebody out there who's speaking for us, air quotes, and that settles down, some of the anger and some of the pressure which is coming from the outside. And I think that, the people at the top, and I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about the actual people who make these things move, the consultants, the analysts, these people who sit there and read through all these polls and all that at the top. They're the ones who figure out what they can get away with, how many people are ticked off in these areas. Can we skip these votes here? Can we get enough people registered that they'll vote down ticket? And even if we lose them on the presidential or certain Senate races, well, we can still play around with the votes and stuff. Because like Charles brought up about, there's still manipulation going on. It's not Russia. And I'll just go ahead and throw it right out there. Israel is heavily involved in manipulating our election. Yeah. Not only them, but Iran, their computer technology has been proven to break through our firewalls also, and North Korea has been involved in our election. Not only them, there's plenty of South American countries also. So to try to put it on one nation, people need to start paying attention to the propaganda which is put out, because they can literally just pick a country and decide and have evidence to prove it. But why do they want you to be upset with these particular countries is what you should be asking.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rob Juno, thank you so much for the super chat. He said, oops, somebody said Julian Assange, have my money. I think it was Charles that you're the one that brought it up, right? Yeah, and silence on Assange is contributing to imperialism, because what Assange did was he revealed war crimes. And the only politicians that have brought up Julian Assange's name was Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz and Thomas Massie. It's really unfortunate. It's really that if people aren't speaking about Assange or other whistleblowers like Assange, it's because they're being tools for the establishment, for the multinationals that want to continue these wars abroad in which they're going to profit. Zach Ortega, thank you so much for the super chat. He said, Franco, keep up the hard work. I wish mainstream media, many journalists had half the integrity you do. Thank you so much. And I will say that the audience members here, you guys also have a lot of integrity, and my guests here have a lot of integrity as well.